Welcome again, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first Mentoring Matters talk for this year. We took a while to get organized because we had to take a look at the feedback from last year's events and hopefully the programs that we have set up for everybody coming into the community this year would be responsive to the needs of the community and that we would attract the right people to join us and that we could help more mentees and attract more mentors to help mentees as well as volunteers to help our community. So I am Liesel Mendoza. I am the founder of the Mentoring Club. Again, welcome to everybody joining us on this session. So I will go through the agenda with you. I'll do a short introduction about the Mentoring Club, and then we'll go right into the topic that we have for tonight, which is leveraging empathetic leadership to drive inclusion and revenue. And our mentor speaker tonight is Jossie Haines. And then the last 5 minutes of the session, I will do some announcements so that you're aware of some of the other events that we have, and we have quite a few, as well as ways for you to become mentors, mentees, volunteers, as well as donors, if you're so inclined to support our cause. So please know that we are on social media. So if you're active on social media, please do like, share, our posts, and also if you would like to have access to more of our content, we have a YouTube channel. And the thing that I missed here is if everybody is familiar with Clubhouse, we do have presence in Clubhouse, and we will be holding more events on Clubhouse. We were just doing some experimental events the last few weeks. And again, thank you to everyone who have helped us and make this event possible. We're actually welcoming new volunteers, and some of the new volunteers are attending tonight's session. So welcome. I think Claire, I see Claire. I don't see everybody, but Claire, Adam, John, Biswa, and Farah are actually joining us as volunteers. And so who are we? For those people who are new to attending our event, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is to provide a mentoring community for aspiring and seasoned leaders. And we would like to help mentees be able to find meaningful work that for them creates positive impact in the world. And we do that by helping them find mentors who can guide them develop the skills they need to achieve their career and life goals. And our dream as a community is that as mentees become leaders, is for them to also become mentors to others. So that is the Mentoring Club. That is the essence of why we exist. Some of our mentees and some of our mentors, so you could see some faces. We're real people, we're an informal community. We want to be a supportive community to everybody who comes and join us. So just a background on the mentee population in the Mentoring Club, what they have expressed in terms of needs for skills development. So just to give you a background, these are some of the skills that they have expressed to us. And so if you are potentially a mentee or potentially a mentor, you can probably relate to whether you can, as a mentor, you can help in these areas, or as a mentee, if you need help in these areas, then you are coming to the right community. And with that, I will hand off the floor to Jossie Haines. She is one of our mentors in the Mentoring Club, and she joined us, I believe, early last year. And I will let her do introductions about herself, but I just want to share that normally I share how I met the mentors. And for Josie, for the case of Josie, she was the one who reached out. She registered as a mentor, and I believe she found us through our social media posts on LinkedIn. And since she started becoming a mentor, we have been engaged in several initiatives, particularly last year, we worked together on a grant for the Equality Can't Wait Challenge, which focused on helping women of color gain power and influence. And also, I think Carol Evanoff is also here, and she's also one of the program team members for that initiative. So anyway, I will turn it over to Jossie.
Quick introduction, I'm Jossie Haines. I'm currently the VP of Software Engineering as well as Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Tile. I've been in the tech industry for over 20 years. I worked on a lot of large-scale consumer technologies, including places like Apple and Zynga and American Express and NetApp. Why is an engineering leader talking to you about empathetic leadership, and how does an engineering leader end up running a diversity, equity, and inclusion at a tech company? And so, in early 2018, I actually almost left the tech industry. So I had just left Apple, and I was burnt out. I was going through imposter syndrome. I thought I actually was a horrible manager. I was like, I'm done with this. I need to go do my own thing. And I was going to start my own small business. But I realized something. I mean, I have a passion for technology. I've been playing with computers since I was 5, and I got a Commodore 64. And if I left the tech industry, I realized I was going to lose the ability to impact the future. And I also saw a number of statistics, which is 56% of women leave tech after 10 to 20 years, and then 22% of those go and start their own small businesses. So I was going to become a double statistic. And I realized instead, I wanted to stay in tech and actually be on a mission to keep women in tech with me. And so I joined Tile because I was like, I'm going to do this under my rules this time. And I want to work somewhere that really cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And our CEO said, hey, I want to make Tile the best place for women to work in the Valley. And so he allowed me to come join. I actually started our mentoring program at Tile. We've run 5 iterations of it so far. Mozilla and a number of other companies have actually started their mentoring programs based off of ours. I actually open sourced all of the content for it up on SlideShare in case anybody's interested. What does that all have to do with empathetic leadership? Well, the Capper Center actually did a tech leaver study about why it is that people are leaving the tech industry. They realized there's 3 pillars that can move the needle to actually keep people. While I'm talking about this in the tech industry, I mean, this is a problem across many, many industries, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows. And so the 3 pillars they realized were you need an inclusive culture, you need comprehensive D&I strategies, and you need fair and effective management practices. And the research showed that if you didn't focus on both the fair and effective management practices as well as the comprehensive D&I strategies, you're not going to move the needle. As leaders, we have to use empathy as the framework that moves this needle forward. 79% of organizations say that this is important to them, but only 13% say they're actually ready to address this trend of needing to foster a sense of belonging. Empathy is tied to all of this because it can really be the foundation for all of these principles. So why is this so important right now in the world today? Well, 25% of women are considering doing something they wouldn't have done pre-COVID, which is actually downshifting careers or leaving the workforce entirely. And if you focus on just moms, that number actually goes up to 1 in 3. 76% of Americans actually say racism is a major problem and is something that should be addressed at work. It's really no longer about just checking a box, but it's really, especially as leaders, living it through all aspects of our companies. If we actually focus on being empathetic leaders and having effective and fair management practices, as well as creating inclusive cultures, we have a ton of benefits that come along with this, right? So the first one is equity. The things that are built today are impacting all aspects of our daily lives, but a lot of times it actually is not fully addressing the needs of women and the non-majority. Examples include voice assistants are less accurate for women and people with accents. Facial recognition software doesn't work as well for people with darker skin tones. The underlying data in machine learning has a lot of bias. We need to take the time to create inclusive technologies that truly solve the challenges of our diverse world. COVID-19 has a disproportionate impact on women, and especially women of color. Last year in April, 55% of the job loss was for women, and the numbers were even higher for women of color, and those numbers just kind of kept going up since then. And 33% of the people who were hospitalized in the US for COVID-19 are Black, and they only make up 13% of the population. If we're not focusing on these issues and take this empathetic leadership approach, we actually may end up in a diversity recession and progress backwards. I've mainly been focusing on the equity piece and why this is good for the world. We all work in businesses and we all have revenues and bottom lines that we have to address. That's why I want to talk about the other side of things and why this is so important. Having that diversity can actually provide you a competitive advantage. If you have a gender diverse team, you are 21% likelier to have a higher probability than for those that don't in their executive teams. And then if your executive team includes both gender and ethnic diversity, that number actually goes up to 33%. Another reason we want to focus on empathetic leadership is innovation. Diverse teams increase innovation. And hey, our customer base is becoming more and more diverse as we become a more global world. So don't you want to make sure when you're building products that you're actually accounting for those different perspectives and views? When you have those diversity on your teams, you can reduce groupthink and actually provide more realistic alternative solutions that actually enable better decision making and a better ability to accomplish the tasks that are needed. Hopefully the economy will go up, but we don't know what's going to happen. And research from Great Places to Work found that equity and inclusion don't just drive stronger company innovation, but it actually also predicts if a company will thrive in a recession. So that's something important to consider when you're looking at whether you're going to cut your diversity and inclusion budget or funding your leadership training for the coming year. And finally, it's cost effective. People might wonder, how can you say it's cost effective if you're asking us to spend money on these things? Well, it's actually fascinating. So this is just in tech. You can apply this to a number of different industries. It is costing the tech industry $16 billion a year because of inequity. And how does that number come up? Well, each person who leaves a job in tech costs an average of $144,000 per employee in full replacement costs, if you include productivity, recruitment, and salary. 37% of the tech workforce leaves due to unfairness. And so that number adds up to 16 billion per year. And it's not just this financial cost, it's your reputation too. Any person that leaves your company, if because of unfairness, is actually less likely to refer others to seek jobs there or refer your product to more people. So that's an even more invisible cost on top of the $16 billion price tag. What's our role as leaders in all of this? A lot of times at companies, I see a focus on DEI and empathy and inclusion, all coming from the HR team. And while that's great, though, at the end of the day, we, the leaders and managers, we're the ones making the hiring decisions. We're deciding what product features to build. We're setting the example for how to treat and engage with others. We have the power to empower our employees to thrive or inadvertently treat them unfairly because of bias. We ultimately control how our teammates feel and what the diversity and inclusion is on our teams. And through empathy, we can use that as the foundation and guiding principle to create these inclusive cultures and better products. So I've talked a lot about why we want to use empathy. So now, what is empathy? My favorite definition of empathy actually comes from Brené Brown. She's a shame and vulnerability researcher who's written a number of amazing books that I love. And she defines empathy as being made up of 4 different components. The first one is taking the time to see the world as others see it. Let's say you have an argument with your team members or your boss or somebody on a different team even. At the end of the day, hopefully you and your colleagues all have one shared goal, which is to build an amazing product or provide an amazing service, whatever it is you do. And so even if you disagree, can you look at that from an empathetic perspective of what is that common goal you're approaching this at? Another way of empathy is your customers. How do your customers perceive the world in ways that's different? An example I actually love giving in my day-to-day work right now is I work at Tile. And for those of you who don't know what Tile is, it's a little Bluetooth location finder that you can put on your keys. You know, my favorite is I attach it to my AirPods. That's a Tile right there. And you can find your lost things. But the one thing that as a woman, I think about a lot is location privacy, right? Like, is somebody going to stalk me with this thing? And it's something my male colleagues don't always really think about. And by having those differences of perspective in the room, we can think about, hey, what are the different use cases our customers might be addressing that we might not always think about ourselves? The second component of empathy is being non-judgmental. And this really coming at things from a place of curiosity instead of judgment. So easy to think we know the answer to something or get really frustrated and start asking a question with, why didn't you? And trust me, like, I know I never like somebody asking me a question that starts with, why didn't you? Like, why didn't you brush your teeth, right? Like, why didn't you do that code review? And it's like, that always starts with a negative context. So, hey, let's use a little empathy. Can we come at it from a place of curiosity? I tell my engineers, like, code reviews are a place where you can be non-judgmental and apply empathy a lot of times. So we can apply it everywhere. The third one is understanding another person's feelings. This one's sometimes hard because this isn't the feeling we would feel. It requires us to really think about what that other person is feeling and allow them to express their emotions, which may be different than the emotions we would have to the same experience. And finally, the fourth component of empathy is really being able to communicate that person's feelings back to them. As a leader, sometimes we struggle with this, especially if we don't agree with what the other person is saying. But here's the key thing. It's about helping that other person know that they're not alone. It's not your job to always fix things. Sometimes all we need is to build that connection, and listening is powerful. Also, let people know that you're grateful that they shared with you. You know, as a leader, sometimes it's hard for people to share with us. So when they do, encourage that, be grateful that they did. Before I go on with the rest of our talk, I wanted to do a little exercise. And so we're going to do some breakout rooms. And this is called the 500 years ago exercise. And the idea is for us to think about things with a little bit more empathy. And so we're going to break everybody out into pairs. And one person has to be the speaker, and the other is the listener. And so the speaker is going to pick, you know, a modern day object. For example, you know, you could pick a cell phone, for example. And your job is to describe that object to the listener. Now, here's the key. The listener is somebody from 500 years ago, and they have no knowledge of the modern world, and they have to listen carefully considering what was said. And they're allowed to ask questions, but they have to consider them as if they were from 500 years ago with no knowledge of modern technology. And so here's a quick summary. We're going to do this as a 10-minute breakout. And so, you know, spend, 30 seconds to a minute introducing yourselves. Then spend about 7 minutes having, person A describe the object and have the second person ask questions to try to guess. And then spend your last couple of minutes reflecting on it. How did it feel to explain something to somebody who has a different perspective? And for the listener, what was it like being in the mind of somebody else? This is an interesting exercise because it's really about applying empathy while you're listening and speaking. We can go head out into the breakout rooms now. Does anybody want to take a minute to share how that felt, either from the speaker or listener side?
I'll give credit to my partner for having checked on what was available 500 years ago. In that we were, or I was gray, and we were talking about sunglasses, and we had to figure, wait a minute, did they even have glass 500 years ago? And we had to figure that out. And then so we figured, yeah, there was colored glass inside church windows, and then that helped the conversation along. But I do admit we were kind of struggling about the effort it takes to put ourselves into a foreign mindset.
And how did that feel?
It did not feel smooth. It lumpy, bumpy. That was my perception.
Yeah, it was. So I was partnered with John, and it's funny because if I were person A, I was going to choose my wine glass and try to describe it as lightning hitting the beach and turning the sand into a hard substance. And he got to be person A, so I didn't have to go down that path, but he was describing it, and it's like we chatted about the qualities of glass being transparent as opposed to covering, like in a church where you can't see through the colors. So some parts of the discussion were easier when you could relate to what was going on, and some parts of the discussion were like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Does anybody else want to share before I keep going here? One more share.
Sorry, we also had the same approach as John's group. I had Tamika and Biswa with me in the group. And what was the 1500s like? So we were comparing things like what they had back then, like did they have alcohol? Because it was hand sanitizer that I was explaining, and they didn't have it during that time, but it's easy to relate. What they used to wash your hands during that time. Was there soap already during that time? And Biswa came up with the idea of maybe ash and water, which is a good idea. And how it's the size that might be fascinating to them, that it's portable, you could bring it with you in that 2-ounce container. You could use it for a month. when they use a bucket of water, maybe to clean their hands. So it's a good experience. That was the question, how big the object is that you could carry it. It's mobile, it's portable.
Mm-hmm. I know you're usually not talking to people from 500 years ago at your work, but you are talking to people with different perspectives, different backgrounds. Your customers come from different perspectives and different backgrounds. Take some time to reflect on this exercise next time you're talking to somebody who might be different from you, and think about how you felt. Maybe have a little empathy when you're going through that. I wanted to spend the rest of our time together and really talk about what are some ways that we can leverage empathy. Here's some ways as leaders that we can really make a difference. First is really taking the time to truly listen. And I know we can start getting a million Slacks, texts, emails in the middle of the day. I tell people, hey, go into meetings, really try to actively listen, turn on do not disturb. When you're actively listening, don't start responding in your head. And this is a problem I've always had. You hear something, somebody is talking, and halfway through them talking, you start thinking about the answer and you realize, oh, wait, I just missed half of what they said. Really, truly listen and then pause and you can respond. And the next one is tuning into the importance of nonverbal communication. 93% of communication is body language. It's a lot harder when we're just on Zoom, right? And so think about that when you're having these communications. The next one is encouraging others to speak up.
Excuse me, if I could just jump in. Do you have any tips for nonverbal communication with people who are international and grew up in a different culture? I don't know the nonverbal communication techniques of a number of Asian nations, of a number of Eastern European nations. I'm in business calls with them. They may be sending me signals and I just don't know because they're from a very different culture. Any comments there?
So that's actually a great question. I actually don't know personally a lot of them, but what about coming at it from a place of curiosity? So what about spending some time getting to know them and talk about the differences in the cultures as one of the ways of building trust and empathy with your colleagues?
Back to your point about Zoom meetings, I read one article saying that there are people whose careers have stalled because they can no longer read a room. Their previous job strength was walking into a conference room and within minutes understanding the subtext of everything, but they can't do that on a Zoom call.
One of the things I have sometimes I do is I'll actually ask somebody else who isn't presenting to take some time to actually look at the audience for me. Because obviously, like if you're presenting on Zoom, it's really hard to look at all of the galleries, right, while you're doing that. But you know, you can ask an ally to do it for you, and then afterwards kind of check in and say like, hey, did you notice anything? Like, and so that's one trick that I've actually used with Zoom calls to try to kind of gauge some of that nonverbal communication when I'm the one trying to present.
So for our company, when we present, we actually don't turn on cameras. Actually, very, very few people even turn on cameras at all. So it's really hard to gauge the audience engagement. Recommendations on that?
You can encourage people to turn on their cameras, right? Sometimes people just want to turn it off, right? You've been on Zoom all day, every day. You know, ask for feedback. Do surveys at the end of your presentations if you want to ask for feedback. I'm usually explicit at the end of some of the presentations I do at work, and I'm just like, hey, I know we're on Zoom. Like, any questions, any feedback, feel free to share. It's hard. Like it's a lot harder to give a presentation and a talk when you don't get that feedback and the audience engagement.
Yeah, where I work, we are actually not allowed to use any kind of video capability just because, it's the industry that we're in. So what we do though, we also have to remember that not everyone is comfortable with speaking up, right? So
Mhm.
you have to provide other means of communication, may it be through chat. So make sure that the
Mhm.
chat is open, they can speak up. It might even be like a junior employee just starting and not being comfortable, just trying to find their way through. Providing some time before, after the meeting and asking them for any feedback, that might be another thing. Because again, they just might not be comfortable speaking with everybody else on the conference call.
Absolutely. And so that actually goes quite nicely into my next point when I was actually going to talk about encouraging others to speak up, is that you need to actually, and this really comes down to, as managers and leaders, part of our job is to really understand what makes each and every one of our employees and people we interact with unique and how they prefer to communicate and be engaged with. Your quiet employee might just need a little bit of a nudge during a meeting, and you can ask them, hey, what's your opinion? For some people, though, that might feel like you're calling them out and might feel horrible, right? And so it's really about figuring out, how do you get people to open up within their comfort zones? And then the next one is giving genuine recognition and praise. And I think this, especially with being remote as well, is super, super important. And it's about giving specific praise. So not just, hey, you did a great job, but hey, that presentation was very clear and outlined what our challenges were and a clear solution and all the costs, right? Like that second one is much more impactful and actually tells the person what you want them to see doing on an ongoing basis. And we have to be a lot more proactive with being remote about this. Pre-pandemic, if we were all in the office, I gave a presentation, I'd be walking out the room and people would be like, hey, good job, right? That doesn't happen now. And so we have to be much more intentional about making sure that we're doing this. Again, taking a personal interest. Spend the first 5 minutes of your one-on-ones actually getting to know your employees, what their challenges are, what their passions are, what motivates them, what are their families up to if they want to share. And I tell people, I'm in a million meetings. I think I had over 15 one-on-ones on my calendar this week. And I literally just take notes on everything anybody tells me, if it's work related, if it's personal related. And so my colleagues are sometimes like, wow, how did you remember that my kid had this thing? And I have to kind of admit, I'm like, well, I kind of wrote it down, but it also shows empathy. You're taking the time to care enough to ask somebody. And that's what's going to keep people at your company. Another one that I think is a great empathetic exercise as a leader for taking personal interest in how your team members are doing is a red, yellow, green check-in on a daily basis with the team. You can do this asynchronously. You can do this as part of your stand-up if you want, if you have daily stand-ups. And the idea is you have every person on your team give a check-in on how they're feeling. So if you're green, you're feeling a-okay today, you feel ready to get your work done and you're good. If you're yellow, yeah, something's going on. Like you might not, maybe you didn't sleep that well last night. You might be a little dreary today. Maybe you need a little help and you can get somebody to check in. And if you're red, it's like, I'm sorry, but I'm just struggling today. Like, and I might need help. But the fascinating thing by doing this as a team is you as the leader don't end up needing to be the one that's solving all of these problems or like helping each other. What ends up happening is your team members will see, oh, hey, this other team member had a red day today. Like, why don't I just reach out to them and see how they're doing? And it actually ends up building more empathy for the entire team. The next one I'm going to talk about is acknowledge.
Can I ask how you do this red, green, yellow thing, like a traffic light?
Yeah.
You mean, how do they flag their color?
So we use a tool in Slack called Stand-Uply. There's a number of different options that let you do like kind of asynchronous polls and stuff. Stand-Uply is just the one we use. In the morning, you get the question pop up and you literally can say, I feel red, yellow, or green today. And you have a little text box if you want to.
You're taking a poll, kind of, right?
Yep.
I got it.
And it's like a quick couple minute thing, right? And it's just a very quick check-in, but it helps build empathy with the team. Another one is, and this one's really tied back to building psychological safety in your team, which empathy is one of the key things that can really help you do that. And it's acknowledging your own mistakes. If you want your team members to tell you when they mess up, you better be doing it yourself, because if not, they're never going to admit their mistakes. And remember, mistakes are learning experiences, right? And so treat them that way. And finally, kindness through boundaries and accountability. So this is the difference between being nice and being kind. I've always had a problem sometimes with being too nice. And so this one's one I always think about. So what do I mean by kindness? By kindness, I mean telling people what they need to hear so they can grow and be a better individual. And sometimes that can be hard. As a leader, we can do that by holding our team members accountable, setting boundaries, setting guardrails, and really holding our team to the level that we need them to. And that's actually being kind to them because we're helping them grow that way. These are just a couple, there's so many different ways you can apply empathy. I just want to take a moment and say, this is something we can apply to all aspects of our daily lives, not just leading, but in all interactions. And it's something we actually can get better at with daily practice. I ask everybody to take some time to commit to spending 15 minutes a day to focus on how you can apply empathy and be potentially a better ally and a better leader and create this better future. And it's those consistent, small daily actions that are going to help us change the world and make a more inclusive world. And with that, I say thank you. And let's open it up to any questions.
I have got a question about the diversity thing. You made the case of the advantages of diversity. Now, I happen to work for a medical device company, and a lot of our positions, at least in the area that I'm in, require one hell of a lot of education. People with master's and PhD degrees are hired. To the best of my knowledge, our diversity represents the diversity of master's and PhD graduates, not the diversity of the general population, because we are constrained by our supply pipeline. These are the kinds of people graduating. They don't reflect the population at large, they just reflect grad school graduates. And so I'm curious, how do you deal with this pipeline issue? The statistics on diversity of highly educated people at this level is lower than what the diversity of the general population is. So I'm just kind of wondering, how do you deal with this? How does Tile deal with this?
So, I can talk about how tech companies deal with this in general, and how to deal with it. But obviously, the more specialized you try to get, the narrower your pool is, right? And right. So if you have to have somebody that has to have a master's degree or a PhD, then yes, you are going to be limited to that pool that you have. The big thing that I try to open up the questions are there reasons that we can't? And in your case, it might be that you can't, right? But in a lot of the tech industry, I ask, hey, is there a reason you have to have a computer science degree to do like 80% of the jobs, right? And sometimes you do need one, but a lot of times it's like, oh no, you actually need this, and this skill, which a lot, I have a number of web devs on my team who don't have traditional computer science degrees, and they're amazing because they learned it on their own. And so, in your specific case, yes, it might be really hard. I would also, though, still try to expand where you're finding people to include, more communities for people from underrepresented backgrounds, and see if you can find, those rare gems who might not fall into the standard bucket, right? So, reach out to communities like Alpha, which is a huge women in tech community. And it's not just about the diversity piece, it's also about the inclusion piece. Because if you don't think about the inclusion piece, you're just going to have a revolving door, which is what's been going on in the tech industry, right? We've spent tons of money, we've spent billions in the last 20 years, but we've mainly just been focusing on moving the needle on the diversity piece. And guess what? Even if you get more candidates from diverse backgrounds coming in, if you're not actually taking the time to create the inclusive culture, they're just going to revolve out the door and leave. Part of it is starting with building that inclusive culture. Are you retaining, the candidates that you are bringing in that are diverse, and, focusing on that as well.
Thank you. Just a little side note, I sometimes find myself in a rather, I'll call it ironic, sad situation where there's a little lack of inclusion, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not based on race or gender, but it's based on academic degree. And I'm bashing my head and saying, you guys don't need to be so elitist. I'm talking about the colleagues. And anyhow, it does happen that you have people in a team and they're very proud of their degrees, and they'll only respect someone else coming on board who has a similar degree, regardless of skin color, regardless of whatever. They're being academic elitists, and I'm trying to get them out of it, but that's a tough battle.
But it's when you have to keep fighting, right? And that's the thing I tell people, like, if we're silent about these things, if we're not willing to question it, if we're not willing to say, hey, are you sure you need that PhD to do this job? We're never going to move the needle, right? And so it's about being willing to be uncomfortable, right? That's a big part of it, is being willing to not be comfortable and speak up even when nobody else in the room says something.
Thank you for that.
This is Nancy. I just have a question, Joyce. What your views are on, like, in the education institutions, just to be able to start to build more of that inclusivity, because I've also heard because I've done stuff with helping women get into tech industries more, but sometimes they get disgusted with it and they'll drop out before even graduating. So I definitely agree with the inclusive nature when they get to the workplace, but also, is there things that we should be looking at or movements to be able to help in that space of education? Because I think academia is a hard place.
Yes. And, the one thing I really see women struggling with when they get into the tech industry, they want to be perfect, right? And so Reshma Shujani wrote this amazing book. She was the CEO of Girls Who Code, and it's called Brave, Not Perfect. And one of the big things is, a lot of times as girls, we are raised to be perfect. And they have this study in she talks about in the book, which I think is very telling, and it was the lemonade study. And so they gave a group of, I think they were 8-year-old boys and girls, they were in separate rooms, they gave them lemonade. And they said, hey, this lemonade's great, it's tasty. But the researchers actually put salt in the lemonade. The room of boys didn't drink the lemonade. As soon as they tasted it, they actually ended up spitting it out and said, ew, gross. The room of girls, however, drank the whole thing down and did not say a peep. When the researchers then asked the girls, why didn't you say anything? They said, oh, we didn't want to hurt your feelings and we wanted to be nice. Now imagine that little girl in her first meeting and how she feels about speaking up. I tell women getting into the tech industry is, a lot of this fight isn't our fight. We need allies to be fighting this fight with us. However, the one thing we need to do is build resilience, because this fight's not going to be over in the next year or two. And so we need that toughness and that resilience to stay in the tech industry and be able to thrive. So that's the one skill I would say is like really build resilience, and that you don't have to be perfect.
I saw Sonia raise your hand, so let's take that as the last question.
Thanks, Liesl. Jossie, I have been in the Silicon Valley for about 30 years, and I feel like we've gone backwards. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
So, you know, I say we're potentially entering a diversity recession with COVID-19, especially, right? One of the things I referenced was the McKinsey study from the end of last year, which says 25% of women are considering leaving the workforce. If we have women in leadership positions leaving the workforce, that means there's going to be even less women for those just entering the workforce to look up to and to have as role models and be able to encourage and provide sponsoring. It is something I'm actually really concerned about. And it's one of the reasons why I spend so much time talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it's so important is if we don't take the time to create these inclusive cultures in the tech industry, we are going to just lose the tiny bit of progress we've made in the last 20 years.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for all of that insightful experience that you've shared with us, Jossie. For our announcements, we just want to make sure that everybody knows that our April Mentoring Matters is on April 22. Again, it's at 6:30 in the evening. And Carol Evanoff is our presenter. I think she's still around. And her history is 36 years in Lockheed Martin, various positions, and she authored 3 books on mapping your career success. She has been a mentor to over thousands of women and men, I think mostly women. And so it's a great honor for us to have her for April's talk. Other activities that are happening, mentee circle hike. So we're organizing our mentees so that they can be supportive of each other. So I don't see Anna and Daniel, but Cloud is here, who's actually part of organizing those hikes. There's Ask Me Anything. We are jumping, or I am jumping into a session every Friday at 12 noon. So tomorrow I have that session, and it's on Zoom, but we're thinking of leveraging Clubhouse in the future sessions and maybe do it at 8 o'clock in the morning so that we could cover Europe and Asia. We have mentors and mentees out of Europe and Asia as well. And some of the health and wellness events that we have, you can see all of this on Eventbrite if you're into yoga. So we believe that to be effective and successful leaders, we need to invest in our health. And so we have this in partnership with one of our mentors, who is the founder of Blissful Yoga and Wellness. So these are some of those. And the next one in terms of networking, we're still in the pandemic, so we're limiting our mentors and leaders hike to 10 people. We're trying to get 5 mentors and 5 mentees to hike alongside each other in pairs, and then switching partners so that we could get to understand the challenges of the mentees, and we give them advice right on the spot, and then we follow through if there are other questions. So again, we're trying to build a more cohesive community where you find this group as your go-to support community. And so we're trying to inject creatively how we could do the networking, since we couldn't do the networking in in-person events. If any of the materials or any of the information that we've shared with you about the Mentoring Club resonates with you and you're interested, please contact me. You can become a mentor, a mentee And also, if you would like to volunteer, I mentioned we have new volunteers joining us in this session tonight. Please, again, contact me. And of course, since we are a nonprofit, if you have the desire to support the cause of mentoring the future and current leaders that we have so that they can find the meaningful work that would make them create positive impact in the world, then please, by all means, we could use all the support that we can get as far as finances are concerned. I mentioned feedback. We'd like to improve our sessions as we move along on a monthly basis. So please do share your feedback with us. I will share all the slides with you. And then the recording of this session plus some clips will be produced by Breen. Breen is our video editor. And I think we will have that no later than Sunday of next week. We will have that posted on YouTube. And this is my contact information for those of you who are attending our session for the first time. My first name, Liesel at thementoringclub.org. I'd be happy, very happy to hear from all of you. And that's what we have for tonight. Please take care of yourselves and enjoy the journey. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.